As an experienced CELTA tutor, I'm often asked this question. English isn't my first language. Can I still do CELTA? Well, the short answer is yes, of course you can. If you want a more detailed answer, then keep watching. I'm Jo Gakonga from elttraining.com, and this is another video in my series on FAQs for CELTA. The first thing you should know is that about half of the people worldwide who take CELTA, English is not their first language. You do need to have a high level of proficiency, but English teaching isn't just about your level of language. So I've said you need a high level of proficiency, so the first question is probably how high? Cambridge state that candidates have to have a C1 plus level of English, so obviously that's pretty advanced. Some centres will ask you to provide an IELTS certificate or Cambridge Advanced certificate, but actually most don't do this. Whatever your first language is, when you go for an interview, your spoken language will be assessed and you'll also have to do some kind of writing, and part of the reason for that is that it's a test of your written English. As I said, everybody has to do this, doesn't matter what their first language is. So from this, the centre will tell you whether they feel that your language is good enough or not. But let's assume that it is. If this is the case, how important is it that English isn't your first language? To answer the question, I want to use this really nice short paper by Kostas Gabrielatas that you can find online. Here's the link here. And this talks about the shape of an English language teacher. Now, by the shape of a teacher, I don't mean whether you can still get into your skinny jeans or not, but he says that there are three aspects to being an English teacher. An English teacher is a person who teaches English. So it's a triangle shape. We have the person and the teaching methodology and the language. Of course, there's some overlap here. And all of these can be improved. You can learn all of these. But it has to be said that maybe some are easier to learn than others. And Gabrielatas says that these things should be in a balance. So perhaps it's quite useful to use this model to think about where your strengths and weaknesses lie. If we look at these three things, we can see that whether English is your first language or not doesn't change your personality. It doesn't change your self-awareness, your interpersonal skills, your perception of learning, your ability to think critically, to use your experience. It doesn't affect your attitude to change or development, diversity, authority. So how about teaching methodology? This is what CELTA will mainly focus on. And it's the area that you're going to keep developing however long you've been teaching. I'm still changing things about my classroom practice, and I've been in the classroom for over 30 years now. Different ways of teaching will suit different learners and different teachers and different contexts. But your first language won't affect this. In fact, because you've learned English successfully in a classroom, you've probably got more idea about what worked for you. So now we come to the aspect that is different, depending on whether English is your first language or not. The language part. We can split this into two parts. Gabrielatas calls them knowledge and skills. And again, both of them are learnable. In general, in my experience, first language speakers of English have an advantage in the skill of speaking English. They don't usually make grammatical mistakes. They have an accent that might be considered native, although obviously there's a very wide range here. And they've got a good vocabulary and perhaps more of an innate feel for what sounds right. But they often have the problem that their own knowledge of how the language works isn't so strong. I know that this is right, but I'm not sure why. What's a preposition? What are phrasal verbs? Why are articles so difficult? As a first language speaker, you haven't had to learn this, you haven't had to think about this, so you probably don't know it. If English is your second language, you probably have the opposite issue. So even if you have a high proficiency, maybe you make occasional slips in grammar, maybe you feel insecure about your accent, maybe you're not always sure about vocabulary, but you've learnt the language in a way that means that you do understand the vagaries of the present perfect, and you do know what a defining relative clause is. You also have the advantage of knowing what the difficulties are because you've walked that path yourself. Finally, of course, if you're planning on teaching in the country where you come from, you have the enormous advantage that you speak the first language of your learners well. And this is particularly useful if you're teaching at lower levels, of course. So whether or not you'll be a good teacher of English is definitely not only about what your first language is. It's a triangle of personality, issues, and teaching methodology and language. And with the language, it can be split into those two areas of skills and knowledge. I've had excellent CELTA candidates whose first language wasn't English, and excellent candidates whose first language was English. I've also had very weak candidates in both of those groups. The two things just aren't connected. So what about getting a job afterwards? I suppose that's worth considering too. The better, more reputable schools tend to understand what I've been talking about, but I'm afraid that there is still a lot of unfair discrimination in the industry, with a bias towards native speaker teachers. This does seem to be improving, and organisations such as TEFL Advocates seem to help, I think. It also depends on where you want to teach. Some countries are definitely better in this respect than others. A final thought is that I think it's worth remembering that the vast majority of English language teachers worldwide do not have English as their first language. And if you want some inspiration, then you should watch this IATEFL plenary from Sylvana Richardson, which I think makes the point really well and got her a standing ovation. I hope this has been a bit helpful and has maybe given you a bit of inspiration if you're thinking about doing CELTA. Good luck with it. Bye bye.